strangers would someday believe they knew his marriage better than he did. Over 4 years, he and his wife, Madison Cole, transformed ordinary domestic moments into carefully polished TikTok videos that attracted an enormous audience. Their playful pranks, sarcastic banter, and affectionate challenges painted the picture of a couple who had somehow mastered the impossible balance between romance and friendship. Every upload collected hundreds of thousands of likes, while fans filled the comments with admiration, calling them relationship goals and proof that true love still existed. Madison often laughed when people recognized them in grocery stores or coffee shops. She thanked supporters with genuine warmth, yet a quiet sadness had begun settling behind her bright green eyes. The audience noticed her smile, but no one saw how often it faded the moment the phone stopped recording. Life had gradually become divided into two separate realities. One designed for millions to watch and another hidden behind the locked front door of their suburban home. That Friday evening began like countless others. Soft ring lights illuminated the living room while Ethan adjusted the camera angle with practiced precision. Every decorative pillow rested perfectly on the couch. Even the family photographs in the background had been carefully arranged to appear spontaneous. Their online world demanded perfection, and Ethan insisted every detail contribute to the illusion. "You ready?" he asked, forcing an easy grin. Madison glanced toward the camera before answering. "As ready as always." Her voice sounded cheerful enough, but Ethan noticed the hesitation. For a brief second, irritation flashed across his face before disappearing beneath another polished smile. The livestream countdown reached 0. Instantly, colorful hearts floated across the screen as viewers poured into the broadcast. "There they are. My favorite couple is live. You two always make my night." Madison greeted everyone with practiced enthusiasm, waving toward the camera while Ethan joked about his terrible cooking. Thousands laughed through animated emojis. The conversation drifted naturally from weekend plans to fan questions, exactly as it always had. They teased each other effortlessly, finishing one another's sentences so convincingly that even Madison almost believed the performance herself. Yet something felt different. Every time Ethan reached to touch her shoulder, Madison subtly shifted away. The movement lasted less than a second, barely noticeable unless someone watched carefully. Ethan's smile tightened almost imperceptibly before he recovered with another joke that distracted the audience. Only a handful of viewers noticed. One comment appeared, "Everything okay tonight?" It quickly disappeared beneath hundreds of newer messages. Madison continued smiling, although her hands remained tightly clasped together in her lap. She answered questions automatically while her thoughts wandered somewhere far from the bright lights surrounding them. Ethan occasionally looked toward her with an expression that seemed affectionate on camera, but carried something colder beneath the surface. Another wave of comments rolled upward. "You seem tired." "Madison, blink twice if you're okay." Someone laughed, assuming viewers were reading too much into ordinary marital fatigue. Ethan laughed too, brushing off the concern with charming confidence. "She's just exhausted from making me look good," he joked. The audience flooded the screen with laughing emojis. Madison forced another smile. Minutes later, Ethan excused himself to refill their drinks, stepping briefly out of frame. The moment he disappeared, the atmosphere shifted. Madison relaxed ever so slightly, inhaling a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She reached for her phone to monitor the livestream comments more closely. Most were harmless compliments. Then one message caught her attention. "We know what Ethan hides." Her smile froze. Before she could react, another appeared. "Tell everyone the truth." A third followed almost immediately. "How long can you keep protecting him?" Madison stared silently at the screen. Her pulse quickened as dozens of ordinary comments continued rushing past, almost burying the disturbing messages beneath jokes and heart emojis. She refreshed the feed, hoping they would disappear. Instead, one final comment surfaced from an unfamiliar account. "The secret always comes out." At that exact moment, Ethan walked back into the room carrying 2 glasses, smiling as though nothing in the world had changed. Madison slowly lowered her phone, but the words refused to leave her mind, and for the first time, She wondered whether someone outside their home had finally discovered the truth Ethan had spent years making sure remained hidden. Ethan's cheerful expression never wavered as he handed Madison her glass, but she barely noticed the drink resting in her trembling hands. The live stream ended 10 minutes later with the same polished farewell they always delivered, thanking their followers for another wonderful evening together. Hearts floated across the screen until the broadcast finally disconnected. The familiar silence settled over the living room like a heavy blanket. The moment the camera light switched off, Ethan's smile vanished. "What were you looking at?" he asked quietly. Madison set her phone on the coffee table. "Just comments. You looked nervous. There were some strange messages." Ethan stared at her for several seconds. "What messages?" She hesitated. "Someone said they knew what you were hiding." His jaw tightened so suddenly that she almost flinched. "Did you answer them?" "No." "Did you screenshot them?" "They disappeared." Without another word, Ethan picked up her phone and began scrolling through the live stream replay. His movements were calm, almost mechanical, yet Madison recognized the warning signs. Whenever he became this quiet, something inside him was unraveling. After several minutes, he tossed the phone onto the couch. "Probably trolls." "Maybe. But if anyone contacts you privately, you tell me immediately." She nodded, though the demand sounded less like concern than an order. Their home looked warm and welcoming to every visitor. Family portraits lined the hallway. Awards from creator conventions decorated the shelves. Fresh flowers stood on the dining table. Yet beneath the comfortable appearance existed countless invisible rules that only Madison understood. Every evening followed Ethan's schedule. Every room had expectations. Every conversation required careful wording. Even disagreements had limits that she had learned never to cross. Months earlier, she had believed his unusual interests were simply private preferences between husband and wife. She had tried to understand, convincing herself that marriage required compromise. But what had once been occasional requests gradually became constant demands that shaped nearly every part of their relationship. The obsession extended far beyond intimacy. Ethan insisted on absolute secrecy. Certain closets remained locked. Packages arrived weekly with no return addresses. Passwords changed constantly. If Madison asked questions, Ethan accused her of betraying his trust. "You promised you'd never judge me," he often reminded her. "I haven't." "Then prove it." Those words echoed through almost every argument. At first, she believed protecting his privacy was an act of love. Over time, it became emotional imprisonment. Ethan framed every boundary she attempted to set as cruelty. Whenever she expressed discomfort, he claimed she was abandoning him, making her responsible for his shame. "You knew who I was when you married me," he said one rainy evening. "I knew part of you. You knew enough." "No, Ethan." Her voice trembled. "I didn't know it would become our entire marriage." He stood motionless. "It isn't hurting anyone. It is hurting me." Silence filled the room. Outside, rain tapped gently against the windows while neither moved. Ethan finally looked away. "You care more about your comfort than my happiness." Madison felt the familiar wave of guilt creeping over her despite knowing the accusation wasn't fair. "I've sacrificed everything," she whispered. "You've sacrificed nothing." His words cut deeper because he believed them. Over the following weeks, their conversations became increasingly strained. Small disagreements over groceries, filming schedules, or dinner somehow circled back to Ethan's obsession. Every compromise flowed in one direction. When sponsors requested romantic vacation content, Ethan refused destinations that interfered with his private rituals. When Madison suggested taking a short break from social media, he insisted their audience would become suspicious. When she spent time with her friends, he questioned every conversation afterward. "Did you tell them anything?" "No." "What exactly did you say?" "The truth." His eyes narrowed. "What truth?" "That we're busy." He relaxed slightly, but only for a moment. Madison noticed how carefully she now measured every sentence before speaking. She edited herself constantly, afraid an innocent remark might trigger another interrogation. Late one night, unable to sleep, She opened her laptop and searched for phrases she had never imagined applying to her own marriage. Emotional manipulation, coercive control, psychological abuse. Each article described behaviors that felt painfully familiar. Her chest tightened as she realized she wasn't imagining the slow erosion of her confidence. She wasn't becoming oversensitive. She was becoming trapped. The next morning, Ethan greeted her with breakfast in bed and flowers, smiling exactly as millions of followers expected him to smile. To anyone watching, he appeared thoughtful, loving, and devoted. Madison forced herself to smile back for another recording, unaware that the pressure building beneath their perfect performance was approaching a breaking point that neither carefully edited videos nor practiced laughter would be able to contain. Morning sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows, but it did little to warm the silence between Ethan and Madison. After another sleepless night, they prepared for yet another scheduled TikTok livestream because contracts, sponsors, and millions of followers expected them to appear together. Ethan moved confidently around the house, rehearsing jokes beneath his breath, while Madison struggled to hide the exhaustion etched across her face. The flowers he had brought her the previous morning already drooped in a vase, their fading petals reflecting everything she felt inside. "Smile today," Ethan said while adjusting the ring light. "People can sense negativity." Madison nodded without answering. She had spent hours reading articles about coercive control, emotional abuse, and manipulation. Every paragraph had described pieces of her marriage with frightening accuracy. For the first time in months, she no longer believed she was the problem. That realization gave her a quiet courage she had never possessed before. The live stream began exactly at 7 o'clock. Thousands of viewers joined within seconds. Comments flooded the screen. "There they are. Our favorite couple. You both look tired today." Ethan greeted everyone with effortless charm, joking about his inability to cook breakfast without burning something. Madison laughed automatically, but the sound felt hollow even to her own ears. The performance continued for several minutes as they answered harmless questions about vacations, future collaborations, and married life. Then a familiar username appeared. "Tell them the truth, Madison." She froze. Another comment followed immediately. "Stop protecting him." Then another. "We already know." Her heartbeat thundered inside her chest. Ethan noticed her expression and casually leaned closer, still smiling for the audience. "Everything okay?" he asked through clenched teeth. Madison looked at him. For months she had protected his reputation while sacrificing her own peace. She had hidden the emotional manipulation, accepted impossible demands, and convinced herself that silence was an act of love. Now thousands of strangers were unknowingly witnessing the final moments of that silence. "I can't keep pretending," she whispered. Ethan's smile disappeared. "What are you doing?" "I'm telling the truth." He reached toward the phone, but Madison pulled it away. Her hands shook violently. "Everyone thinks we're the perfect couple," she said, looking directly into the camera. "We're not." The comments section exploded. "What happened? Is this real? Oh my God." Madison inhaled deeply. "For years I've hidden things because I thought protecting my husband mattered more than protecting myself. Ethan has an obsession he demanded I keep secret. Consumed our marriage. Controlled our lives. Every decision revolved around it, and whenever I tried to set boundaries, he made me feel guilty for saying no." Ethan's face turned pale. "Stop talking," she continued. "I never cared that he had private desires. I cared that he used them to manipulate me. He isolated me emotionally. He convinced me that my discomfort made me a terrible wife. I stayed silent because I was ashamed and afraid." The livestream audience surged as viewers shared the broadcast across social media. Ethan stepped closer. "End the stream." "No, Madison, I'm done lying." She described the locked closets, the endless secrecy, the emotional pressure, and the constant accusations whenever she questioned him. Without revealing explicit details, she explained how his secret fixation had grown into an unhealthy obsession that dictated nearly every aspect of their relationship. It was no longer about private preferences. It was about control. Within minutes, clips spread across every major platform. Reaction channels reposted the confession. News accounts captured screenshots. Hashtags featuring Ethan's name climbed trending lists at astonishing speed. The comments transformed from confusion into mockery. He's been lying for years. What a fraud. I can't believe this. Ethan stared helplessly at the screen as his follower count began dropping in real time. Brand partnerships posted statements distancing themselves. Messages poured into his phone faster than notifications could disappear. Every vibration felt like another piece of his identity collapsing before millions of spectators. His breathing became uneven. His eyes filled not with sadness but humiliation. The room suddenly felt impossibly small. Madison stepped backward, sensing something inside him changing. Ethan slowly looked away from the phone and fixed his gaze on her instead. For the first time since they had met, she saw nothing familiar in his expression. Only wounded pride, unbearable shame, and a terrifying rage that promised the worst was still to come. Ethan's cold, unblinking stare lingered on Madison for several unbearable seconds before she quietly backed toward the hallway. Neither spoke. The live stream had already ended, but the damage continued multiplying with every passing moment. Notifications erupted from both of their phones without pause, each vibration announcing another repost, another reaction video, another headline dissecting the collapse of the internet's favorite couple. Within an hour, the confession had escaped TikTok entirely. Clips flooded Instagram, YouTube, X, Facebook, and countless gossip pages. Popular creators debated Madison's claims, while strangers confidently analyzed a marriage they had never witnessed beyond carefully edited videos. Some sympathized with Madison's description of emotional manipulation. Others accused her of publicly humiliating her husband for revenge. The arguments spread faster than facts ever could. Ethan locked himself inside his office. The room, once filled with plaques celebrating follower milestones and framed sponsorship deals, suddenly felt like a museum dedicated to a dead career. His phone buzzed continuously on the desk. One email arrived, then another, then 6 more. Every subject line sounded colder than the last. Campaign paused. Partnership terminated. Contract cancellation notice. He opened them mechanically. Each company thanked him for previous collaborations before explaining that recent events no longer aligned with their brand values. Years spent building an online empire disappeared through polite corporate language and electronic signatures. His hands began trembling. "This can't be happening," he muttered. He refreshed his profile. The follower count dropped again. 5,000 gone. Then another 8,000. Comments poured beneath every photograph. "She deserved better. You manipulated everyone. We believed your lies." Some mocked him relentlessly. Others invented outrageous stories that had never happened. Rumors multiplied until reality became impossible to separate from fiction. Anonymous accounts claimed they had known Ethan personally. Fake screenshots circulated. Edited videos exaggerated his facial expressions, turning harmless moments into sinister evidence. Ethan stopped reading after midnight. He couldn't. Every sentence felt like another knife twisting deeper into his pride. The following afternoon, his phone rang repeatedly. He ignored every call until one familiar name appeared. Marcus. After staring at the screen for several rings, Ethan finally answered. "What? Dude, I've been trying to reach you. I'm busy." "No, you're hiding." Ethan remained silent. Marcus had known him since college. Before the followers, before the sponsorships, before anyone cared about algorithms or engagement, they had shared cramped apartments and impossible dreams. Marcus understood the version of Ethan that existed before internet fame reshaped his identity. "I'm coming over," Marcus said. "You don't have to. I'm already outside." 20 minutes later, Marcus sat across from Ethan in the silent living room. The untouched coffee between them had already grown cold. "You look terrible," Marcus admitted carefully. "I've looked better." Marcus nodded. "I watched the live stream." Ethan's shoulders stiffened. "I don't need another lecture." "I'm not here to lecture you." "Then why?" "Because everyone else is treating you like a headline instead of a human being." For the first time in days, Ethan looked directly at someone. Marcus leaned forward. "You made mistakes. You think?" "I'm serious." "So am I." Marcus sighed. Public embarrassment feels permanent when you're living through it. It isn't. You don't understand. I understand more than you think. No. Ethan shook his head slowly. Everything I built is gone. Careers recover. My reputation won't. People forget. They won't forget this. Marcus paused before choosing his next words. Then stop thinking about your followers. They were my life. That's exactly the problem. Ethan stared blankly ahead. My sponsors are gone. So? My audience hates me. So? My name is ruined. Marcus's voice softened. Those things aren't your identity. They were. Silence stretched between them. Finally, Marcus spoke again. You need help. I'm fine. No, Ethan. I said I'm fine. Marcus noticed empty energy drink cans scattered across the room. The curtains remained closed despite the bright afternoon outside. Ethan's beard had begun growing unevenly, and dark circles shadowed his bloodshot eyes. Have you slept? I don't remember. Have you eaten? I wasn't hungry. Marcus recognized the signs of someone unraveling beneath unbearable pressure. Talk to a therapist. I don't need one. You need someone. I needed my wife. The words escaped before Ethan could stop them. His expression hardened almost instantly. No, he whispered. I needed her loyalty. Marcus frowned. Loyalty doesn't mean silence. It should. Not when someone's suffering. Ethan stood abruptly, pacing across the room. She destroyed everything. No, she humiliated me. She told her truth. My life is over. Marcus rose to his feet. Only if you decide it is. Ethan turned toward the television, where another news segment replayed clips from the live stream. His own smiling face appeared beside bold headlines and scrolling commentary. Every station repeated the same story. Every platform replayed the same confession. Every notification reminded him that millions had witnessed the collapse of the carefully crafted life he believed defined his worth. As Marcus quietly left the house, Ethan remained standing before the television, his breathing slow and uneven, while a far darker thought settled into his mind. If Madison had taken away the life he treasured most, perhaps there was only one way to make sure she never took anything from him again. The thought refused to leave Ethan's mind after Marcus walked out the front door. He stood motionless before the television long after the news segment ended, staring at his own reflection in the darkened screen. Every headline replayed inside his head like an endless loop, each one reminding him that the life he had carefully built had been dismantled in a single live stream. Upstairs, Madison locked their bedroom door for the first time since they had been married. The click of the lock echoed louder than she expected. She leaned against the door, breathing slowly until her racing heartbeat settled. The house no longer felt like home. Every room carried memories of laughter staged for cameras and arguments whispered behind closed doors. The contrast had become unbearable. Opening her laptop, Madison created a password-protected folder with a simple title, Evidence. One by one, she began saving screenshots of text messages, emails, and voice notes that stretched back several months. Some contained apologies that followed explosive arguments. Others revealed Ethan's attempts to make her question her own memory whenever she challenged his behavior. You're imagining things. That never happened. If you loved me, you'd stop making me feel ashamed. Reading the messages in sequence made the pattern impossible to ignore. What had once seemed like isolated incidents now formed a relentless cycle of manipulation, guilt, and control. She added photographs of damaged household items from previous arguments. None showed physical violence against her, but each captured moments when Ethan's anger had spilled into the environment around them. A shattered picture frame, a cracked kitchen cabinet, a broken lamp lying across the living room floor. Every image reminded her how close his temper always came. Her phone vibrated. It was her younger sister, Olivia. Madison hesitated before answering. Hey, Olivia said softly. I've been worried about you. I'm okay. No, you're not. Madison closed her eyes. You saw the live stream? The whole world saw it. Silence settled between them. Finally, Olivia spoke again. Tell me what's really happening. The question broke something inside Madison. For nearly an hour, she described the emotional manipulation, The constant monitoring, the accusations, and the exhausting pressure of protecting Ethan's carefully guarded image. She admitted she had spent years convincing herself that things would improve if she just tried harder. "I don't recognize him anymore," Madison whispered. "Have you ever been afraid of him?" She paused. "I wasn't before. And now?" Madison looked toward the locked bedroom door. "Now? I don't know what he's capable of." Olivia inhaled sharply. "You need to leave. I've been thinking about it." "No, stop thinking." Madison remained quiet. "Pack a bag," Olivia continued. "Come stay with me tonight. I can't disappear without a plan." "You don't owe him an explanation." "I know. Then why are you still there?" Madison struggled to answer because the truth sounded impossible even to herself. Part of her still hoped Ethan would become the man she had married instead of the stranger now living downstairs. After ending the call, she packed a small suitcase and hid it beneath the guest room bed. She also copied every piece of evidence onto a secure cloud account, terrified that Ethan might discover and destroy everything stored on her laptop. Downstairs, Ethan sat silently at the dining table. His phone displayed Madison's location-sharing app. She hadn't realized he had quietly enabled permanent location access months earlier under the excuse of keeping each other safe. Now he refreshed the map repeatedly. When she walked into the kitchen, he looked up. "Were you talking to Olivia?" "Yes." "What did you tell her?" "We talked." "About me?" Madison carefully poured herself a glass of water. "We talked about everything." His expression darkened. "I told you family doesn't need to be involved. They're already involved. Because you involved them." She met his eyes. "I needed someone. You had me. I don't anymore." The words lingered painfully between them. Neither raised their voice. Neither moved. Yet every sentence felt more dangerous than shouting. That evening, Ethan quietly checked the mileage on Madison's car before locking every exterior door himself. Later, he scrolled through security camera footage from outside the house, replaying ordinary moments with growing suspicion. Every phone call she answered, every text she received, every trip to the grocery store became evidence in his mind that she was planning something larger. Madison noticed the questions becoming more frequent, the silences more threatening, and the watchful glances lasting longer each day. Living together had become an exhausting performance where every conversation felt like stepping across hidden explosives. Neither of them realized that Ethan had already begun planning one final live stream, believing it would be his last chance to reclaim the reputation he had lost before everything slipped permanently beyond his control. The following evening arrived with an eerie stillness that unsettled Madison from the moment she opened her eyes. Ethan moved through the house with unusual calm, humming softly while making coffee as though the previous weeks had never happened. His smile had returned, carefully polished and almost identical to the expression millions of followers had once adored. That familiar mask frightened her more than his anger ever had. "We're going live tonight," he announced. Madison looked up from the kitchen table. "I don't think that's a good idea. It isn't optional." She said nothing. Ethan placed 2 coffee mugs on the table before sitting across from her. "We can fix this." "No," Madison replied quietly. "You want to fix your image. My image is our future. Our future disappeared a long time ago." His jaw tightened, but he quickly forced another smile. "People deserve the truth. I already gave them the truth. You gave them your version." She stood. "I'm not doing this anymore." "You will." The certainty in his voice chilled her. An hour later, the familiar ring lights illuminated the living room once again. The camera stood in its usual position, framed perfectly to capture the couch, the decorative shelves, and the smiling couple who no longer existed. Madison considered walking out the front door before the stream began. Yet every instinct warned her that turning her back on Ethan now might provoke something even worse. The countdown reached 0. Thousands joined almost instantly. Comments poured across the screen. "They're back. Please tell us everything. Is this the apology stream?" Ethan smiled into the lens. "Good evening, everyone. Madison and I wanted to clear up some misunderstandings." His voice sounded calm, almost reassuring. Madison remained silent. He turned toward her. "Tell them." She looked directly at him. "I'm not taking back what I said. The comments accelerated. "This is awkward. Something's wrong." Ethan chuckled nervously. "My wife has been under a lot of stress." "No," Madison interrupted. "I've been living under a lot of pressure." His smile faltered. "Madison, you wanted this live stream. I wanted honesty. So do I." She faced the camera. "I meant every word I said before. I spent years protecting someone who kept telling me my feelings didn't matter. I'm finished pretending everything is perfect." He leaned closer. "Enough. No, you don't understand what you've done. I understand exactly what I've done. You destroyed my life. I exposed the truth." The room fell silent except for the constant stream of notification sounds from viewers reacting in real time. Ethan's breathing became heavier. "You could have talked to me. I tried. You embarrassed me. I begged you to listen. You made me into a joke. You made yourself one." The words struck him harder than any shout. Viewers immediately sensed the shift. "Someone call her. This feels dangerous. End the stream." Madison slowly stood. "I'm leaving tonight." His eyes widened. "No, I packed my things." "You aren't going anywhere. I already called Olivia." For a brief moment, Ethan froze. Then something inside him seemed to collapse. "You planned this." "I planned to survive." His expression emptied completely. Every trace of the charming creator disappeared. Viewers watched as his posture stiffened and his voice lost every hint of warmth. "You promised," he whispered. "I promised to love you," Madison answered, her own voice trembling. "I never promised to disappear inside your life." He stepped forward. She stepped back. The distance between them vanished. The camera continued broadcasting every second. Comments flooded the screen so quickly they became impossible to read. People begged someone to intervene. Others searched for their address. Several viewers began calling emergency services, desperately trying to explain what they believed was unfolding live before them. Madison raised a shaking hand. "Ethan, don't." His breathing echoed through the room. "You took everything." "No," she pleaded. "You can still walk away." Instead, he lunged. The camera shook violently as furniture crashed against the floor. Madison screamed. The live stream captured fragments of chaos without revealing every horrifying detail. Viewers heard desperate cries, objects breaking, and Ethan shouting incoherent words consumed by humiliation and rage. The image lurched sideways until only part of the living room remained visible. Messages exploded across the screen. "Police! Someone help her! Oh my God!" The sound of struggling suddenly stopped. Heavy breathing filled the room. For several endless seconds, nothing moved except thousands of frantic comments racing upward. Then distant sirens began echoing outside. Ethan slowly turned toward the fallen phone still broadcasting live. His face appeared in the frame. Gone was the smiling influencer who had spent years building the perfect online marriage. Only a shattered man stared back. Without speaking, he reached toward the device. The screen went black. Across the city, emergency dispatchers continued receiving frantic calls from horrified viewers, while patrol officers raced toward the address linked to the livestream. Within minutes, flashing lights surrounded the quiet suburban home, and the digital recording that had just ended would become the most devastating piece of evidence Detective Rachel Bennett had encountered in her entire career. The flashing red and blue lights reflected across neighboring houses as Detective Rachel Bennett stepped beneath the yellow crime scene tape. The night air carried an uneasy silence broken only by the voices of officers securing the property and paramedics moving with practiced urgency. Curious neighbors stood behind police barriers, whispering among themselves while news helicopters circled overhead. Rachel had investigated countless violent crimes during her 15-year career, yet the expressions on the responding officers' faces warned her this case was unlike anything they had experienced. A patrol sergeant approached immediately. "Detective Bennett?" She nodded. The entire incident was live-streamed. Rachel frowned. "The whole thing?" Thousands watched it happen. She glanced toward the front door. Then every second matters. Inside the house, the living room remained almost exactly as viewers had last seen it. Ring lights still illuminated the room, casting harsh shadows over overturned furniture and shattered decorations. The phone used for the live stream rested on the floor beside the collapsed tripod, its battery finally exhausted after recording the final moments of a marriage that had unraveled before millions. Crime scene technicians photographed everything before touching a single object. Rachel slowly surveyed the room. Nothing about it looked spontaneous. Every camera angle had been carefully arranged for entertainment, yet now those same cameras had preserved the truth more faithfully than any eyewitness ever could. Secure every digital device, she instructed. Laptops, phones, external drives, everything. Within hours, investigators seized computers, tablets, backup storage devices, security cameras, and networking equipment. Specialists immediately began preserving the live stream before copies could be altered or removed from online platforms. The recording spread faster than authorities could request its removal. Although social media companies eventually restricted the original footage, thousands of copies had already been downloaded, clipped, and reposted across the internet. Detectives worked alongside digital forensic analysts to identify the earliest uploads and preserve the original recording without alterations. Rachel watched only enough of the live stream to understand its evidentiary value. She refused to view the final moments repeatedly. Instead, she focused on everything that came before. What happened before violence? She asked. A forensic analyst enlarged the footage. Watch Ethan's behavior. Rachel observed subtle patterns invisible to casual viewers. Whenever Madison answered questions independently, Ethan interrupted. Whenever she shifted away physically, he unconsciously followed. Small controlling gestures repeated throughout nearly every broadcast. A hand placed possessively on her shoulder. A silent glare lasting only seconds. Questions disguised as jokes. Interruptions disguised as affection. Viewed individually, each moment appeared harmless. Viewed together across months, they formed an unmistakable pattern. This wasn't sudden, Rachel murmured. No, the analyst agreed. It escalated. Search warrants soon uncovered additional evidence. Deleted text messages were recovered from cloud backups. Despite Ethan's attempts to erase conversations, forensic software reconstructed hundreds of exchanges. Investigators discovered repeated emotional manipulation. You embarrassed me. You'll regret making me feel this way. Nobody will believe you. Financial records revealed another disturbing layer. Although Madison earned nearly half of their income through sponsorships and content creation, Ethan maintained exclusive control over every account. He approved purchases, monitored spending, and transferred advertising revenue without consulting her. Bank statements showed Madison repeatedly requesting access to funds she had personally helped earn. Rachel highlighted the transactions. Financial control, she said quietly. The evidence continued growing. Location-sharing applications revealed Ethan constantly monitoring Madison's movements. Home security footage showed him checking her arrivals and departures even during ordinary errands. Recovered emails documented Madison secretly contacting counselors specializing in emotional abuse just weeks before the killing. Most heartbreaking of all were the files inside a password-protected folder investigators discovered on her laptop. The folder carried one simple title: Evidence. Inside were screenshots, voice recordings, journal entries, photographs, and carefully dated notes describing arguments that never appeared online. Madison had documented everything with remarkable precision, hoping someone would eventually understand what life behind the smiling videos had truly been like. Rachel closed the folder slowly. She knew. Another detective nodded. She was preparing to leave. Every new piece of evidence confirmed the same conclusion. The live stream had not created the tragedy. It had merely exposed the final chapter of months of coercion, emotional domination, and psychological control that had remained invisible beneath perfectly edited content. As forensic teams completed their analysis, prosecutors began assembling a case built not upon a single violent night but upon an unmistakable pattern of escalating abuse. Meanwhile, inside a secure interview room at police headquarters, Ethan Cole sat alone, refusing to answer questions while staring silently at the blank tabletop, unaware that investigators had already reconstructed his hidden world with greater accuracy than he had ever imagined possible. Months after his arrest, Ethan Cole entered the courthouse through a secured underground entrance, shielded from the crowds gathering outside. Satellite news vans lined the streets before sunrise, while reporters competed for the best camera positions. Protesters held signs demanding justice for Madison, and curious spectators waited for hours, hoping to witness the trial that had already become one of the most discussed criminal cases in recent memory. What had begun as a viral livestream had evolved into a national conversation about coercive control, emotional abuse, and the dangerous illusion of perfect lives online. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere felt heavy. Detective Rachel Bennett sat quietly behind the prosecution table, reviewing her notes one final time. Across the room, Ethan appeared thinner than he had during his years of internet fame. His expensive designer clothing had been replaced by a plain suit provided for court appearances. He rarely looked toward the gallery, keeping his eyes fixed on the defense table as though refusing to acknowledge the world beyond it. The judge called the proceedings to order. Opening statements began. The prosecutor addressed the jury with calm confidence. "This case is not about embarrassment," she said. "It is about control. It is about months of manipulation that ended in irreversible violence. The evidence will show that the defendant did not lose himself in a single emotional moment. Instead, he spent years believing his wife's independence was a threat that had to be controlled." The defense attorney rose moments later. "Ladies and gentlemen, no one disputes that a terrible tragedy occurred. However, tragedy does not automatically prove premeditation. My client experienced overwhelming public humiliation before millions of viewers. His psychological state deteriorated rapidly under extraordinary circumstances. The evidence will demonstrate a catastrophic emotional collapse rather than a carefully planned killing." Over the following days, prosecutors built their case piece by piece. Digital forensic experts explained how deleted messages had been recovered despite repeated attempts to erase them. Financial investigators presented records showing Ethan's exclusive control over shared income. Technology specialists authenticated the livestream, confirming it had not been altered or manipulated. Every witness added another layer. Every exhibit strengthened the timeline. Then Detective Bennett took the stand. She described the investigation carefully, explaining how dozens of seemingly harmless videos revealed consistent patterns once examined together. The behavior wasn't obvious in isolation, she testified. But across months of recordings, we observed repeated interruptions, monitoring, emotional pressure, and controlling conduct. The defense questioned her aggressively. "Detective, people argue in marriages every day, don't they?" "They do. Can uncomfortable conversations prove criminal intent?" "Not alone. So your conclusions depend on interpretation." Rachel remained composed. "My conclusions depend on evidence viewed as a whole." The prosecution's most emotional moment arrived when Madison's private journal entries were introduced. The courtroom became silent. Her words were read aloud exactly as she had written them. "I smile because people expect me to. Sometimes I don't recognize the woman pretending everything is fine. He says love means protecting his secrets, but I've forgotten who protects mine." Several jurors lowered their eyes. One quietly reached for a tissue. Even seasoned reporters stopped typing for a moment. The journals revealed no hatred toward Ethan. Instead, they documented confusion, fear, hope, and repeated attempts to save a marriage that seemed to grow darker with each passing month. They showed someone trapped emotionally long before she ever spoke publicly. When the defense presented its case, psychologists testified about humiliation, stress, and public shaming. They explained how sudden social rejection could contribute to severe emotional instability in vulnerable individuals. Ethan himself chose not to testify. His attorneys argued that silence protected his constitutional rights. Outside the courthouse, television commentators debated every witness and every ruling. Public opinion remained deeply divided. Some believed Ethan had suffered an extraordinary psychological collapse after worldwide humiliation. Others argued that countless people experience public shame without resorting to violence. Inside the jury room, however, opinions carried far greater consequences than internet debates. Jurors spent hours reviewing videos, journals, text messages, financial records, and testimony. They wrestled with a difficult question that extended beyond this single case. Could profound psychological collapse explain Ethan's actions without excusing them? Or had the evidence revealed something far more deliberate? As closing arguments approached, both sides understood that the answer would determine not only Ethan Cole's future, but also how the court interpreted months of invisible coercion hidden behind millions of smiling views. While one final discovery waited to reshape the jury's understanding of what had truly driven the fatal confrontation. As closing arguments drew nearer, prosecutors requested permission to introduce one final piece of evidence recovered only after months of meticulous forensic analysis. The judge approved the request, believing it directly addressed the defendant's motive. The courtroom, already captivated by weeks of testimony, fell into complete silence as Detective Rachel Bennett returned briefly to the witness stand with a newly authenticated collection of deleted voice recordings and personal notes extracted from Ethan's encrypted devices. The recordings surprised everyone. Rather than discussing the private obsession that had dominated headlines since Madison's livestream, Ethan repeatedly spoke about something far deeper. His words revealed an overwhelming fear of losing authority over every aspect of his marriage. Again and again, he described Madison's independence as betrayal rather than personal freedom. In one recording, his voice remained calm. "If she stops needing me, she'll stop listening to me." Another followed weeks later. "People respect men who stay in control." Then came the final recording. What destroyed this marriage was the defendant's relentless belief that love required obedience and that exposure justified retaliation. The distinction changed the atmosphere inside the courtroom. Until that moment, much of the public conversation had centered upon Ethan's hidden secret. Reporters debated scandal. Commentators focused on embarrassment. Social media thrived on sensational headlines that reduced an entire tragedy to a single shocking revelation. Now the discussion shifted. Expert witness Dr. Amelia Foster, a forensic psychologist specializing in coercive relationships, explained the difference with careful precision. "Private preferences do not create homicide," she testified. "Control does." She described coercive control as a systematic pattern rather than isolated arguments. It involved monitoring behavior, limiting independence, manipulating emotions, controlling finances, rewriting reality, and convincing victims they were responsible for their abuser's actions. Jurors listened attentively. Dr. Foster continued, "When someone with an overwhelming need for control experiences profound public exposure, they may suffer what psychology refers to as a narcissistic injury. Their carefully constructed identity collapse. Headlines no longer emphasized Ethan's private secret, but instead highlighted emotional abuse, coercive relationships, and the warning signs hidden behind seemingly ordinary marriages. Advocacy groups praised the proceedings for helping the public recognize that domestic violence often begins long before physical harm appears. Detective Bennett watched quietly from the gallery. She remembered Madison's journals describing constant guilt, endless apologies, financial dependence, and the slow disappearance of her confidence. None of those experiences had seemed dramatic enough individually to attract attention. Together, however, they revealed a devastating pattern that countless victims silently endured every day. When court recessed for the afternoon, reporters no longer asked whether Ethan's humiliation explained the killing. Instead, they asked why so many warning signs had been dismissed until it was too late. Inside the nearly empty courtroom, the attorneys organized their final notes, knowing the jury now possessed a far clearer understanding of what had truly driven Ethan's actions. The only remaining question was whether that understanding would lead them to mercy or to justice when the verdict was finally announced. The morning of the verdict arrived beneath gray skies that seemed to mirror the mood surrounding the courthouse. Television crews had returned before sunrise, broadcasting live updates while supporters of domestic violence awareness organizations stood quietly outside holding photographs of Madison Cole. There were no loud demonstrations this time. The excitement that had surrounded the trial had faded, replaced by a solemn understanding that no verdict could restore the life that had been taken. Inside the courtroom, every seat was occupied. Ethan Cole entered under heavy security, his expression blank as he took his place beside his attorneys. Across the aisle sat Olivia, clutching a framed photograph of her older sister. Detective Rachel Bennett remained several rows behind the prosecution, observing silently as she had throughout the proceedings. Months of investigation had led to this single moment. The courtroom doors closed. The jury filed in. No one spoke. The foreperson stood as the judge requested the verdict. "We, the jury, find the defendant Ethan Cole guilty." The word echoed through the silent courtroom. Guilty. Ethan showed almost no reaction. His shoulders remained still, and his eyes stayed fixed on the defense table. Whatever emotions existed beneath his calm expression remained hidden from everyone present. The judge thanked the jurors before turning toward sentencing. After reviewing the severity of the evidence, the calculated pattern of coercive control, and the overwhelming proof presented during trial, the court imposed the maximum penalty permitted under the law. "Ethan Cole," the judge said firmly, "you are hereby sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole." A quiet sob escaped from the gallery. Olivia lowered her head, tears falling onto the photograph she still held tightly against her chest. The sentence acknowledged the gravity of Madison's death, but it did not erase years of manipulation or the unbearable absence now left within her family. Outside the courthouse, reporters immediately announced the verdict across every major network. Justice had been delivered. Closure had not. Later that afternoon, Olivia stood before a small group of journalists. She spoke calmly despite the grief visible in her tired eyes. "My sister wasn't murdered because of a secret," she said. "She was murdered because someone believed controlling another person mattered more than loving them." The crowd remained silent. For years, millions watched edited videos and believed they knew our family. None of us saw what happened after the cameras stopped recording. Please don't assume smiling pictures tell the whole story. Her words spread almost as quickly as Madison's final livestream had months earlier. Detective Bennett watched the interview from a nearby hallway before quietly returning to her office. Madison's case file rested on her desk alongside dozens of others from previous years. Different names, different families, disturbingly familiar patterns. She opened her notebook. Across one blank page, she wrote a single question. What warning signs did everyone miss? She thought about the subtle interruptions captured in old videos, the financial control, the isolation, the repeated apologies, the fear hidden behind practiced smiles. None of those moments alone had seemed dramatic enough to alarm millions of viewers. Together, they had revealed a pattern that now appeared painfully obvious. Rachel closed the notebook slowly. Justice had held one man accountable, but countless victims remained trapped inside relationships that looked perfectly ordinary from the outside. As media attention gradually shifted toward other headlines, Olivia began discussing plans to honor her sister's memory by helping others recognize emotional abuse before it became fatal. While Detective Bennett prepared to close the investigation knowing the lessons learned from Madison's life might ultimately protect people whose stories had not yet reached their tragic ending. 6 months after the trial concluded, the headlines surrounding Ethan Cole gradually disappeared from front pages, replaced by newer scandals and fresher tragedies competing for public attention. Yet, for the people whose lives had been permanently changed, time moved differently. Madison's absence remained painfully present in every family gathering, every holiday, and every quiet moment when someone instinctively reached for the phone before remembering there would never be another call from her. Olivia refused to let her sister become another forgotten statistic. Working alongside counselors, survivor advocacy organizations, and educators, she helped establish a campaign dedicated to recognizing coercive control before physical violence occurred. Workshops traveled to schools, community centers, and workplaces, teaching people how emotional manipulation often begins with small acts of isolation, financial dependence, constant monitoring, and carefully disguised intimidation. Madison's journals, shared with her family's permission, became powerful educational material demonstrating how invisible abuse could slowly consume someone's confidence long before anyone noticed the danger. The response exceeded every expectation. Thousands attended seminars. Survivors shared stories they had hidden for years. Families began difficult conversations they had previously avoided. Instead of remembering Madison only for the horrifying final moments of her life, People increasingly remembered her courage in finally speaking the truth despite knowing the personal cost might be devastating. Meanwhile, the live stream itself remained locked inside secure evidence archives, while unauthorized copies continued surfacing across obscure corners of the internet. Most major platforms removed the footage whenever it appeared, yet fragments survived through reposts and screen recordings. Investigators, educators, and journalists agreed that the recording represented one of the clearest documented examples of coercive control escalating into deadly violence before a live audience. Its value no longer rested in shock. It rested in warning. Training academies for law enforcement occasionally referenced the case when discussing domestic violence investigations. University researchers examined the digital evidence to better understand patterns of emotional abuse hidden behind carefully constructed online identities. Mental health professionals pointed toward the tragedy when explaining how untreated psychological collapse combined with obsessive control could produce catastrophic consequences. The conversation had changed. People no longer focused upon Ethan's private secret. Instead, they asked better questions. Who controls the relationship? Who feels afraid? Who is slowly disappearing behind someone else's demands? Detective Rachel Bennett carried the final case file into the records division on a quiet Friday afternoon. She paused briefly before placing it onto the archive shelf alongside hundreds of completed investigations. Closing the folder brought no satisfaction. Justice had been delivered exactly as the law required, yet she understood that justice rarely repaired broken families. Before leaving, she glanced once more at Madison's photograph clipped inside the file. A genuine smile looked back at her. Rachel hoped future investigators would remember the lessons hidden beneath the evidence. Not every dangerous relationship begins with bruises. Some begin with silence. Some begin with control disguised as love. As she switched off the office lights and walked into the fading evening, the courthouse, the investigation, and the trial finally belonged to history. The recording, however, would never truly disappear. Somewhere, another viewer would eventually discover Madison's story, recognize pieces of their own life within it, and choose to seek help before control became violence, ensuring that her final act of courage continued saving strangers long after her own voice had fallen silent.